All right, today let's talk about door gaskets. I've got a 632. This goes for basically all door gaskets, but let's take a look down here in the bottom right corner. Look at that. It's ripped all the way through. That's the best indicator for when to replace a gasket. If you got a good seal and you're not ripped all the way through, like on the side here, doesn't go all the way through. If that part were ripped in there, I'd say replace. That's fine. But once you start getting like that, it's time to replace. So how we do it is we have to prep the gasket first. And the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna come here. I've got my door gasket for this machine. I like to just cut a little circle right in the center. I get my blow dryer, put it in there and give it on low, 5 minutes. Don't overdo it. We just wanna get the gasket soft. All right, so after I blow dry the gasket, I get it out. I put it out on the ground. I work out any kinks. This gasket looks nearly perfect. It's not twisted up or mangled in any way. This will go on great. This is a good gasket. Sometimes you don't get a good gasket, at which point you just send it back or get another one. So what I like to do, and there's a lot of different ways to do a gasket. Some people don't take any of the bolts out all the way and just loosen them all. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna loosen all the bolts right down the door, and I'm gonna slowly take the door gasket off until I just have a door with the metal stripping and the bolts. I will maybe take out a couple of those. I'm calling them bolts. They're little screws. Take out the screws in the corners mostly, because that's where the trouble areas really are. So I'll take the screws out in the corners, and then I'll slowly work the new gasket into the metal grooves. It's very methodical, and it is sort of a pain, but I'll show you how I do it. Let's do it. So we're at the midway point here, and I've got the door gasket off, and you can see on the ends I'll take the screws out all the way. I don't worry about removing the screws too much. If I have to remove them, I remove them. I just make sure I keep them and get them back in all around the door. Elsewhere on the retainer that holds the gasket in, I will unscrew the screws almost all the way. I'm now going to get the gasket, and I'm going to put it over the top, and I'm going to start fitting the lip of the gasket into the lip of the retainer. See here, you can see there's a nice groove that will actually hold on the little bead in the gasket. So I'm gonna go do that and show you how I get that done. And while I'm doing it, if I can't get the bead in into the retainer, I'll just remove the screw, get the bead in, get the retainer back on the gasket, and then tighten it down a little bit. And I keep it not ultra tight, but I keep it loose all around the door, so I have to make adjustments to give some slack in certain areas. I will be able to slide the gasket up and down because the retainer won't be all the way tight. It'll just be semi-tight, holding it in place. And then once it's perfect, I will tighten it down when I have the gasket in the perfect position. All right, so I got the gasket basically wrapped around the door, and I'm gonna start getting the bead of the gasket on the interior into the bead on the retainer right there. And you can see it's all loose on the sides, but I have done the top already, and you can kind of see right in there. And don't worry about having screws left out at this point or these being very tight. I do keep these loose like I had mentioned. I just get it in all the way around the door, just like that. Now I'm gonna do that basically all the way around the door. If you can't get the bead in, don't be afraid to take out a screw. And once we have it fitted loosely around the door and the gasket's in place, we'll start to make adjustments, all right? All right, so at this point I've got the gasket on. It is seated in the lip of the retainer all the way down the door, and I've got every screw ready to be screwed in. They're all just a little bit loose, and I keep them a little loose at this point because at this point you want to be able to make adjustments and tighten. So for example, you want to really have perfect corners. You can see down here this is a little bit off. I'm going to want to pull this up sort of like that, and then maybe tighten up here just so I can really smooth out the corners. I don't want them popping off. I want the corners tucked in the frame of the unit, and we're just gonna achieve that and get a nice straight gasket. by sort of adjusting it. And you'll see certain areas maybe on the side of the gasket as well. For example, trouble spots. Look at that, where that's popping out a little bit. Well, if you pull up from above or below, you can really start to tighten it up. And then you kind of tighten up the door a little bit just to make it perfect. So I'm just gonna start adjusting it and tightening as I go. All right, so I've given it my final pass. I'm nice and even across the top and down the sides. If you step away from the door, nothing really sticks out or pops out. Looking at the side, you may still have some trouble areas like that, but with a working and cold refrigerator, it should seal really good. One thing you can do is you can go on the side of the door and you just want to make contact all down the frame of the unit. And this one seems to be doing perfect. This one went on great. So that's basically it. There's a lot of other little things with these door gaskets, do's and don'ts, and when to do them, when not to do them, and I'll get into that shortly. A few door gasket things before you attempt this at home. We get calls all the time asking or telling us basically that, hey, my refrigerator's not cold, I need a door gasket. 99% of the time, if your refrigerator's not cold, it probably has nothing to do with the door gasket. When the refrigerator gets a little bit warmer, the door seal will suffer. They do kind of go hand in hand, but the number one thing is having your refrigerator cold before attempting to do a door gasket, just because if you take the door seal off of the door while the machine's warm, you risk the chance of warping the door. So always make sure that your machine doesn't have any error codes and that it's very cold before attempting to do the door gasket. You want to always use the OEM part. Never buy a door gasket unless it's coming directly from the manufacturer. That goes for all refrigerators. There's a lot of eBay gaskets out there that a lot of people purchase and try to put on themselves, and they're usually calling us to try to save their door, and a lot of the times that results in purchasing a new door. So you always want to check that you're getting the OEM part. It's labeled from the manufacturer. Other than that, always check your door hardware around the doors. You want to make sure that, you know, the door is closing well before doing the door gasket. Oftentimes people will say, my door is not closing well anymore, I need a gasket. More often than not, it has to do with the door hardware, the metal components and nylon and bushings that actually cause the door to actually swing and close evenly. That is more often the case when the door is not closing really well. If the gasket's in poor condition and it's hanging from a thread and, you know, it's obvious and your refrigerator's working good, then have at it, give it a shot. Otherwise, you really want to take time to evaluate what's going on before you actually change the door seal, because you will end up with a door that's warped or never really closes right again. It can happen. I like to work on those you saw from the bottom up. I get the top on first, and then I go to the bottom and I work my way up. There's a lot of different ways to do it. Some of my technicians take the full metal retainer off the door completely and then fasten it back on. Others don't take any of the bolts out and just slip the gasket in. I'm sort of like a 50-50. I like to take some of the screws out and then leave the others in and fit the gasket in. Always make sure that the refrigerator gets cold. Always get the right part, and you should be good to go.